Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. My name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the public school system like I did, but you are scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the exact same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends. Janae Daniels here. I am the host of the School to Homeschool podcast. Now, if you are interested in homeschooling and you're afraid to take the plunge and you feel like you need someone to hold your hand, I am right now taking a very small number of one-on-one coaching clients where I walk you through the whole homeschooling process, except for I tailor it to your family's needs. So if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching, there is a link in the show notes below, a Calendly link to set up a discovery call with me. We'll talk 15, 20 minutes about the needs of your family and then decide if one-on-one coaching is for you. It is a free discovery call, so you're not obligated by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not going to cost you anything. So if that's something that you've been thinking about, that you'd like one-on-one coaching with your homeschooling journey, click on the Calendly link below and we can have a little discovery call and set that up. Now, let's get into today's topic because y'all, I have been so excited and preparing for this. And so I'm excited to talk about today's topic. Today, I want to issue a challenge. So we'll get into the challenge here in a moment and how you can sign up for that challenge. But let's talk about, I've brought this up in multiple episodes. I will continue to bring this up in multiple episodes because it's such an important thing. Now, I have to be honest with you. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about reading aloud, and I'll be issuing you the reading aloud challenge here in a minute, in just a little bit. But let's talk about reading aloud for just a little bit. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I remember specific elementary school teachers reading to me. I remember Miss Nabhan in the 3rd grade reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to me and a dog to our class, and a dog called Kitty. And it was probably my favorite part of the whole day was laying our heads on our desks and then, Miss Nabhan pulling out the book and reading a chapter or reading, for 10 minutes and then putting the book away. I have to be honest, my parents did not read a lot to us as kids. We read a few books. Like I can think of, we didn't have a lot of books in my house growing up. I think we had the book, The Magic Porridge Pot, and by Paul Goldoni, who's a fabulous illustrator, by the way, and an author. He does a lot of fairy tales. And then we also had The Giant Jam Sandwich, and I can't remember who wrote The Giant Jam Sandwich, but I still love that book. Again, they were library books that my mom forgot to take back and then had to pay the fine. So those were pretty much, I think we had a couple of other books, but those were pretty much the only books that we had, children's books that we had in our house. I do remember very distinctly one Christmas when I was a teenager, my mom reading aloud a Christmas story that took a couple hours, and I was like 14 or 15, and I was totally mesmerized. And this is not commentary that my parents were bad parents or anything like that at all. But we didn't read aloud a lot when I was a kid. I didn't learn to read until really 2nd or 3rd grade. I was not a proficient reader until then. And it wasn't until 4th or 5th grade that I finally read my first chapter books on my own. So it's really fascinating to me that I guess it's not that much of a surprise because I didn't grow up with parents reading aloud to me a lot. Again, those few books when I was a child, I remember my dad used to tell us oral stories from his father, who was a farmer and a sheep herder. And so he would, my dad would tell us stories, but we weren't read to a ton when we were kids. But I loved in elementary school being read to by my teachers. Again, Miss Nabhan in the third grade read to us Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and A Dog Called Kitty and How to Eat Fried Worms. And here I am, 47. I still remember which books that she read aloud. I remember Miss Binder in the fifth grade reading Wayside Stories from Wayside Stories from Wayside School. I'm getting that totally wrong. Anyway, by Lewis Secker, who wrote Holes. So I remember throughout the years, my teachers reading to me and loving being read to. So when I became a homeschooling parent, when my kids were in public school, they always said, the teachers were like, here is the chart, read for 20 minutes with your child. And so usually it meant, like, I thought it was like, well, you have the child read for 20 minutes, right? But I did read to my children picture books when they were little, but I didn't think about reading to them once they could read pretty stinking well on their own. I stopped reading to them. And so it wasn't until I entered the homeschooling world where I learned that reading aloud should happen through the teenage years and can be a beautiful thing, which is interesting because when I was in high school, I had a friend, Elizabeth West, if you're listening to this, she would always tell me about every night her dad would read a novel to them. And I remember one day she and I were hanging out and she's like, oh, I have to get home because I don't want to miss Read Aloud with my dad. And they were reading The Scarlet Pimpernel, which, if you haven't seen that movie from the 80s with Jane Seymour, it's fabulous. But I remember the next day seeing her again because we'd hang out all the time. And she's like, oh my gosh, last night I was crying as my dad was reading. And there was this part where Percy watches his wife walk away and, all this happens. And she's like, I was just crying. Y'all, at the time when we were having this discussion, I was like 16 or 17. And my friend Elizabeth was the same age, right? And she's like, it's my favorite part of the day is when my dad reads a novel to us. And she had older siblings and she had younger siblings, and they'd all gather and they'd read. And I remember as a 16, 17-year-old feeling envious, thinking, oh, wow, I wish my parents would do something like that. I mean, we did read scriptures and stuff like that as a family, but we never read anything else as a family, except for that one Christmas where my mom read this short story to us that totally mesmerized me. So the homeschooling world all knows about the power of reading aloud, but the rest of us don't, unless we get deep into literature, or unless a person really is a bookish kind of person. Now, I never considered myself a bookish kind of person until I became a homeschooler, and I decided, I'm like, no, I'm going to be a bookish kind of person. Even though I read a lot, and I have read a lot for a long, long time, I didn't consider myself a bookish kind of a person. But yet in the homeschooling world, like, it's a super common thing to be bookish and read aloud to your kids. Like, it's a tenet of homeschooling. Like, everybody in the homeschooling world knows that you should read aloud to your kids even through high school. So this is the coolest thing, is the effects of reading aloud they're absolutely phenomenal. Now, let me just tell you, the University of Sussex University in the UK did did this whole research study on reading. And this is what they said. And I will include the article that I pulled this from in the show notes so you can have it. Quote, according to research carried out by MindLab International at the University of Sussex, reading for only 6 minutes reduces stress levels by 68%. making it more effective than listening to music at 61%, having a cuppa at 54%, taking a walk, which y'all know I'm a walker, at 42%, or playing video games at 21%. Dr. David Lewis, a cognitive neuropsychologist who conducted the study, agrees that reading a book is the ultimate relaxation, but goes further to say this is more than merely a distraction, but an active engaging of the imagination as the words on the printed page stimulate your creativity and cause you to enter what is essentially an altered state of consciousness. Researchers believe that the concentration required for reading has a physiological effect on the brain, engages the imagination, and stimulates creativity, all contributing to a shutdown of the emergency fight or flight response. As the stress hormones dissipate, the fear center of the brain becomes less active, and the rationalization areas of the brain take over. This shift in the brain makes you feel calmer and more in control. Did you hear that? Reading for 6 minutes reduces stress levels by 68%. Oh my gosh. So if you read to your children, not only are you receiving lower cortisol, but your children are also receiving that because that same imagination is engaged. The crazy thing to me right now is that I was reading a study, and I'd have to find it. I don't have it offhand, but 19% of high school graduates, actually I have it in show notes, in a different show note. So I'll see if I can find it and put it in here. 19% of high school graduates. Now, these are not dropouts. 19% of high school graduates are reading at a 5th grade level or lower. They're functionally illiterate, guys. Somewhere else I was reading that 50% of the adults in the United States cannot read at a functional level. Like, our illiteracy rates in this country are abysmal and embarrassing. And you and I can combat that with our own children by reading aloud to them. There's some great books that give lots of statistics on reading aloud, including the Enchanted Hour and the Read Aloud Family, the Read Aloud Revival. Read Aloud Families by John Trelease. And then the Enchanted Hour here is by Megan Cox-Gurdon. Read Aloud Revival, the Read Aloud Family is by Sarah McKenzie. Anyway, I'll include all of these in the show notes. But the effects of reading aloud to our kids is incredible. Okay, so I have been reading this book called The Reading Promise, and I'll include this in the show notes as well. And in this, she talks about, her story is really interesting because when she was like 9, she and her dad decided to read for 100 days, 10 minutes a day for 100 days. And their reading streak ended up lasting for 9 years until the year she graduated from high school and went off to college. And the book is beautiful. It's told in story form. It's story form. And she tells about the experience reading with her dad every single night. He was a librarian, an elementary school librarian. And so every night they read for 10 minutes. And the rule is they have to read before midnight. And he was really funny because he loved reading aloud to her so much that he would practice before he'd read the chapter to them. But 10 minutes, that's all that they would read was 10 minutes and they did it 10 minutes for 100 days. And it totally changed her life, and it totally affected her. The cool thing is when we read aloud, and I've shared this before, it enables our children to be live lifetimes without actually living lifetimes, to be put in tough situations and make decisions with the characters without actually being in those situations. It puts us face to face with greatness. One of my favorite literary characters is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. And there's been so many times that I thought, what would Atticus do in this situation? What, or I remember once, Katie was my daughter, who's 16 and who is an avid reader. She reads and reads and reads and reads and reads and loves all things to do with books. For Christmas, she got her fourth bookshelf that we've crammed into her bedroom that she shares with her sister, and it is already full. All of her money goes towards books. She's definitely a reader, and she considers herself a reader, which is great because that's now rubbed off on my almost 9-year-old, who now considers herself a reader, even though she didn't start reading until a year and a half ago. She considers herself a reader as well and has a bookshelf. There's actually 5 bookshelves in their room, and anyway, it's squished. You go in there, it's a little claustrophobic, but I'm like, it's fine. I'd rather them can like associate themselves as being readers than be like, no, we're gonna have a minimalist bedroom. Like I've said in the past, in my heart, I'm a minimalist, in practice, not so much. So Kara has a bookshelf, and then Katie has 4 bookshelves in her room. And they both have filled up their bookshelves with books, and they've used their money to buy books. So it's been fun to watch Katie. I was going somewhere with that, but anyway, I lost my train of thought, which happens because I'm old now. There is power when, I remember what I was going to say. So Katie, one day, she loved Anne of Green Gables. She loved it so much that one of the later books, she was so emotionally moved by one of the things in the books that she copied like this letter that was written in the book, and she copied it in her journal, and she came downstairs and she was just sobbing. And at the time she was probably 13 or 14. And she's like, Mom, the letter was so moving to me that I copied this letter in my journal, and it meant so much to me, which I was like, great, that's copy work. Check that box. But then one day she came back to me and she said, I have this really hard decision I was making. And I thought to myself, what would Anne Shirley do? What would Anne Shirley do in this situation? And then I did what Anne Shirley would do. I'm like, isn't that interesting that here she goes to a fictional character who had experienced something similar to think about what would that character do. Reading aloud to our kids puts kids face to face with greatness. Now, the other thing that it does is it enables, when they hear us reading to them, it enables them to let their imaginations go wild without them having to decode the words and form the sentences and go through all the reading comprehension, but they get the same results as if they are reading, which is crazy. And she talks about that in The Enchanted Hour. She talks about some of the things that happens to the brain in The Enchanted Hour with reading aloud. The other thing that it does is it enables us as families to have inside jokes. And like, for example, if I were to ask my kids, like, what's a confidence man? My kids could tell you, oh, that's somebody who swindles people. That's not a normal term that's used. But my husband had met this guy, and he's like, oh, I met this guy and da-da-da. And I was like, no, that guy sounds like a confidence man to me. And he's like, what's that? Right. Because my husband hadn't been reading with us. I'd been reading during the day. And the kids are like, you don't know what a confidence man is, Dad? It's somebody who swindles people. And my husband's like, where did you hear that term? I'm like, the Great Brain series. He uses the term confidence man several times, specifically when this one guy comes into town and John JD's dad keeps saying, oh, that man is a confidence man. So like reading aloud gives us these inside jokes that are very exclusive to our families, which is so fun. It builds family culture. It enriches our family culture, which is really fun. And I would say like growing up, we'd watch a lot of movies. And so my siblings and I have inside jokes from the movies, but there's more benefits when you're read to and you have those inside jokes about the books than just by merely watching movies. Not that watching movies is bad, because no, it's not at all. So those are just a few benefits of reading aloud with your kids. The other thing is it brings us closer together. Like my kids, my two youngest, their favorite thing to do when I am reading to them is to sit on either side of me and then I tickle them. And one of them usually tries to hold the book, or else, like last night, I had to hold the book with one hand and then tickle one child on their face and on their back, and then switch hands and then tickle the other child. And they snuggle. And for them, it becomes a very comforting time to be read to and then have their face tickled. Right before I hopped on to record this podcast, that's what I was doing with Jacob. Jacob and I have been reading together, just he and I. And I've been trying to read with each child individually. And I just tickled his face, and we're reading October. October is the name of the book. So I just tickled his face, and he loved it. I said, Jacob, are you happy? He goes, mm-hmm. I said, do you like reading aloud? He goes, mm-hmm. Now, this is my child who is not a child of many words. He said, I like it. I like reading aloud. And I like having my face tickled. And I like hearing the stories. Who doesn't like hearing stories? Really? The other day, my husband and I he was scrolling Instagram, and this guy was telling a story on Instagram. And my husband put it on pause because he had to take care of something, but he wanted to finish listening to the story. But I was like, oh, I have to leave. Send me that link because I want to finish the story, right? We are captivated as human beings by the power of story. So there's so many wonderful things. So with that, read aloud with your family. Now let's talk about the challenge, because this challenge is a read aloud challenge and it's not hard. As I mentioned in this study at the University of Sussex, 68% of 6 minutes a day reduces stress levels by 68%. This is going to be the challenge. Again, we're going to start it next week on Monday. You can start it sooner than that if you'd like, but we're going to start it officially, those of y'all who are doing this with me, on January 13th, so you can get time. Usually when I have a goal or I have a challenge, I've done walking challenges with people in the past. This is my first time doing a read aloud challenge, but it's going to be January 13th is when I'm going to officially start it. For those of you who want to join me in this challenge, we're going to go for 30 days reading aloud to your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren or nieces and nephews, but you're going to read aloud, or with your husband. But for those of you who have children, you got to read with your children. You're going to read 10 minutes a day for 30 days straight. No exceptions. You got to do it. So I prepared some goodies for those that are interested. Now, I'll tell you about the goodies here in a moment, but here's a few rules. Rule number one, keep the books interesting and short. If you find the book not interesting, don't read it. If it's not interesting to you, it's not going to be interesting to your kids. For little kids, picture books are great. If you're new to reading aloud, just know that children have to develop that ability to focus for long periods of time. Like my kids can listen for hours now. When we very first started reading aloud, they couldn't. We were lucky to go 10 minutes. Like that was hard, which is why I'm doing only 10 minutes for this challenge. I'm not doing 30 minutes for the challenge, just 10 minutes so that you can ease into it. Shorter chapter books are better when kids are reading. So I find that a lot of the reading lists that are out there, when you look up like the ages and it'll say 8 to 12 for this book, generally, really it's for older kids. Like that might have been the case like in the 1800s, but like I find that like, let me give you, for instance, when we started homeschooling and I started reading aloud, and I was trying to get my kids to read individually, I picked up A Castle in the Attic for my child, Jacob, who at the time was in third grade. And A Castle in the Attic, it said on some website that I read, it said, it's for grades 3 to 6. But Jacob had a really hard time reading it, and he was a good reader, and his reading comprehension was really high. And he would get really frustrated and he wouldn't read it. And I tried to read it to him, but he would just get frustrated. Well, what I realized is that even though he was a good reader, and at the time he had just turned 9, yeah, 3rd grade. No, maybe he was 8. I can't remember. He was 8 or 9. It was above his reading level. And he was really frustrated. Now, when I read aloud, the kids don't read as well generally. Like I read to them, or we'll listen to an audiobook together. But I found that if I drop down to like the Frog and Toad series or Little Bear, the Little Bear series, that like once we did that, he wanted to read. So sometimes we try to push our kids to read books that are way farther ahead than they are, and it says that they're for younger kids when really the books are for older kids or a little bit older. And so be aware of that. So maybe you start with for younger kids, definitely for younger kids, like toddlers, board books, and then the little bit older picture books. Teenagers like picture books too, especially if they're really good picture books. Read picture books. Short chapter books are great. If you want a hilarious series, I've shared this a million times. My family loves The Great Brain. Not everybody will necessarily love The Great Brain series, but my family loves The Great Brain series. And so if you find that the book is not interesting, there's some very popular books out there and classic books that my family really had a hard time getting into when we very first started reading aloud. And that was tough. It might be, now I don't love these books, but if it gets your child reading, I'll take it. The Captain Underpants books, I'm telling you, early readers think they're hilarious. Graphic novels, you could even start with those, and that works. Jacob right now is loving Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, and they're fun books, but they're graphic novels. So pick some books that you're interested in reading. And again, you might start with shorter chapter books, and that's just fine. And you read 10 minutes a day for 30 days. You want to make sure that the reading your read aloud time is not a punishment. Like if we don't do this, then and this becomes their punishment. Like this is a time for you to get cozy. You can get out hot chocolate. You could have them eat popcorn. They don't have to sit still. Also, you want to have them keep their little hands busy or tickle them. That's what my kids like to do during read alouds. Katie likes to work with her hands when she is being read to, or if we're listening to an audiobook, her hands have to be busy, which makes sense. Like, don't think that the kids are not listening. By them working with their hands, especially boys, sometimes boys will need to be active. They might be jumping on a little trampoline while they're listening to read aloud. All of that is fine. And you have to remember, like, their little hands and bodies oftentimes will need to be moving. When I was in college, my degree was in costume design. I remember I was taking a millinery class. It was a very labor intensive class. And I would take my hats to my other classes that were outside of my major. And it would drive my professors crazy. I was quiet. I wasn't hurting anything. But the sheer act of, just that sewing, just by the nature of my personality, I was able to remember better than taking notes. And I remember once I had an Old Testament professor tell me that he was concerned. I hadn't even taken a test yet, but he was concerned because I was concentrating too much on one of the hats that I was working on and doing the needlework for the hats that I was working on. Then, because I wasn't taking notes, and I told him, I was like, I could tell you when I was on this stitch, you were discussing this. When I was on this stitch, you were discussing this. Like that became my form of notes. And he's like, oh. And then when I got an A on the first test, then he didn't bug me again. So it's okay to let their little hands be busy. Let them be eating. If you've got, a little tiny child, and you're trying to read and put them in their high chair and give them one piece of food at a time so their little mouths are busy. But make it an experience where it is a comforting, inviting experience. If you start a book and the kids are having a really hard time getting into it, then go to a shorter book or a book with shorter chapters. Again, this is not something we discuss enough in the public school system. They never talked to me about it when I had all my kids in the school system. The homeschooling world knows all about this. So you'll find homeschooling kids can sit for hours listening to books, but those of us that have transitioned or have had to transition, like, anticipate that there's gonna be an adjustment period for them to be able to concentrate that long reading aloud, but they will get to the point that they really, really love to be read to, just like they did in school, or just like I did when I was in school. So it's something that they have to get used to. So here's the challenge again. It's starting January 13th. We're going to read. You could start sooner. Again, 10 minutes a day for 30 days. Now, here's the fun thing, and I'm so excited about this. I wanted to make it special and have a way for you to track it. So if you sign up for the challenge on my website, I'm going to send you a PDF download that has some goodies. I've got one of the PDFs has 5, like one of the pages has 5 downloadable bookmarks. Like you print out the page, print it out on cardstock, and you can cut out the bookmarks. One of the bookmarks has the poem "The Reading Mother" on it. And the other 4 bookmarks have beautiful paintings of mothers reading to their children. They're gorgeous bookmarks. I designed those for you. I really like to design things. Maybe you won't like them. I love them. I think they're beautiful. You can see what those look like on the website. And then the other one is I've drawn out a tracker for 30 days. So for every day that you read at least 10 minutes, you color in a little book. Now, the books I've just included on the spines of all of the books, just random classics and books that our family likes. So you don't have to read those books that are on the tracker. All your only job is you read for 10 minutes that day or more, then you color in the spine of a book. And then after 30 days, you've completed your little bookshelf and you're done with the challenge. And you've hopefully started a new habit with your family. So to sign up for the reading challenge, go to schooltohomeschool.com. It's on that main page and you can sign up. I'll send you those free PDF downloads so that you can track it and have bookmarkers for your books. Anyway, I wanted to do something fun for y'all and give something fun for you to have. So they're free downloads. So you don't have to pay anything. But I've designed those especially for you. And I did design all of them. So they're coming out of my imagination. If you don't like the designs, well, let me know and maybe I'll try to do something better in the future. But I'm so excited. My vision for our society is that we have families that are reading together once again, that it becomes the norm and the cool thing to do to read together as families. And I believe if more families read together, I think that, of course, the literacy rate would go up, but I think that our society would be in a much, much better place. Couple quotes for you. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "Show me a family that reads together and I will show you a family that changes the world." I'll put that quote on the website. I kind of butchered that quote, but I'll put it on the website. In the show notes. This is from Gladys M. Hunt for Honey for a Child's Heart, and it's all about reading to children. Oh, that's another fabulous book. I'm actually in the middle of reading, so I haven't gotten to the end yet. But she says, children have 2 basic needs, writes. Children have 2 basic needs, writes Eric Fromm in The Art of Loving. They need both milk and honey from their parents. Milk symbolizes the care given to physical needs. Honey symbolizes the sweetness of life. that special quality that makes life sing with enjoyment for all it holds. Fromm says, most parents are capable of giving milk, but only a minority of giving honey too. To give honey, one must love honey and have it to give. I love that. And she talks in extent about reading aloud to children, and it's beautiful. The other thing she says is, what kind of books? And she goes on to say, stories that make for wonder, stories that make for laughter, stories that stir one within with an understanding of the true natures of courage, of love, of beauty, stories that make one tingle with high adventure, with daring, with grim determination, with the capacity of seeing danger through to the end, stories that bring our minds to kneel in reverence, stories that show the tenderness of true mercy, the strength of loyalty, the unmockish respect for what is good. And that's from Gladys Hunt, Honey for a Child's Heart. My friends, I'm excited for you to join me on this Read Aloud challenge. Again, 10 minutes a day, 30 days in a row. It's doable and it's free and it's not hard. Join me. I'm excited for y'all to join me on this quest. If you want to sign up for the Read Aloud challenge, just go to my website, schooltohomeschool.com. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing better than you think you are. You got this. We'll talk next week. Excited for the challenge. Let's do this. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.